Hello, everyone. Welcome. It's Tuesday again, as you know. That's gonna actually when I watch this back, it's gonna be really boring, isn't it? Every single time. Hello, it's Tuesday. Hello, it's Tuesday. It started off Thursday. That's as exciting as we get in terms of changing. Anyway, today, as normal, we're in that program, Capture One. For the next hour, we're going to be live, as always. So for those of you that are watching this back, you should have been here. For those of you that are watching it live, please do comment, heckle, annoy, observe, whatever else, chat amongst yourselves in the comments and in the live chat. The reason I say that is twofold. Number one, you're going to get more out of it if you ask questions. And number two, it's a lot better than me just talking at a screen and imagining all of you, because I see all of your names all the time, but I don't know what any of you really look like, apart from certain people like Brian, who we went into bear country with. It's another story. So we are going to spend, as I say, the next hour editing in that program, Capture One. Capture One being the raw processing software made by the clever guys out in Copenhagen in Denmark. So Capture One's origins it was originally the editing software for what is my camera, so the Phase 1 medium format system. Over time and over the years, that expanded to other camera systems, other manufacturers, and now we are left with a product which is pretty universal, works for most cameras, and it's one of several options for raw editing programs out there. It just happens to be my one of choice. So if you don't know how to get it or how to use it, CaptureOne.com, you can download a free trial. It lasts for 30 days. I think from memory, even if you've had a previous version of it, if you want to download the new version to try it, just be very careful updating any old catalogs or something, but you still get that 30-day grace period. There's no costs, none of that stuff, unless you choose to buy at the end. For those of you that are wondering what we're on today, it's the same version we were on last week, which is quite refreshing because they've been doing quite a lot of updates recently. So it's 16.5.5 is the current version. You get that in the About screen of Capture One if you're not on that version. If you have a subscription, so option 1, your subscription means that you're paying every month to always be on the latest version, so please make sure that you are. If you've got some concern or in a production environment, maybe test the latest versions first, as with any software. But generally speaking, you're paying to have the latest version, so go and use it, go grab it, download it, install. If you're not on a subscription, if you bought a 16.5 dot whatever perpetual license, you are entitled to the version 16.5.5. So anything on the little dot at the end, so the not the first 0.5 but the second 0.5, just to confuse things this week, you get that as part of your perpetual purchase of 16.5. When it ticks over to 16.6, you do not get that as part of a perpetual license. Subscribers do, yay. I don't care. I don't earn money out of subscriptions, unfortunately. But for those of you that are on perpetual licenses, yes, you freeze at that point in the releases. You can upgrade. You can. There's an option in your account. So if you go to CaptureOne.com and log into your account, you'll see the options to upgrade. But if you are one of those people that tends to upgrade all the time to the latest version, let's call a spade a spade. They have made it more financially lucrative to do it through subscription as an encouragement than they have to do it if you're going to buy a perpetual license and upgrade every single time. So your choice, but I'd think about that. The other thing as well, we mentioned last week, there is a price increase coming from, I can't remember whether it's the 3rd or the 6th of March, one of those two. So if you want to buy into an annual subscription, do it before then, ideally, because you get it for slightly cheaper than it will be. It's going up by 6% in March, April time. So bear that in mind. Prasad, do I have any hint on upcoming features? No, because even if I did, I'm not allowed to tell you. So what you will find is, as a general rule, and I'll put this out there, Capture One used to be a much more secretive company in terms of software development than it is now. It used to be that no beta features were ever discussed, no future versions, no future features, nothing. It was all locked down. As insiders, we would be told it, so either ambassadors or insiders, whichever format people were in, we would get a heads up of what's coming and we'd be involved in testing it, but it was absolutely shut down in terms of who could talk about what. That evolved into Capture One would openly start to talk about specific features that were coming up pretty much near to release. Now, and you'll have seen the last couple of releases, actually, as soon as they can talk about something that's coming and positive and new, they're doing it. And they're talking openly, and people are able to talk openly about it. So, yes, you might find some people, certainly internal to Capture One, people obviously know a lot more about the features that are coming up. But generally speaking, at the point that the feature is certain to be a feature, then you're probably going to see stuff announced on it anyway in some of the marketing messages. The reason I say about the certain to be a feature, one of the risks of telling people stuff in advance is it doesn't become a feature. Match look being one of them. So if any of you saw, I'll try after this, I'll put a link in the description for a video with Tice and Alexander from Capture One that talked about the evolution of Match Look. And Match Look wasn't a 2024, end of 2024 feature. It had been thought about and talked about and planned and developed for a long time before it came out in different guises. And it needed restarting, resetting, lots of challenges along the way. If they'd announced it originally when they first thought we can do this, you'd then get the pitchforks out. Everyone would try and burn the house down because they haven't had what they were promised. So there's a balancing act in terms of when you announce stuff and keeping people excited. Yes, they want to excite people about new features, but they only want to do that when they know that something's coming. Paula, in answer to your question, did I get your email? I did. Apologies. That was from last week about the achromatic stuff. I will send that to you today. I did forget to send it to you, but yes, Paula wanted a black and white sample from a Phase 1 achromatic back, which you will get now. So that's our version there. Another little fun announcement. How do you get files into this to be edited? Because we're editing your files over the next hour. You send them there, paulreeferlive.wetransfer.com for now. The reason I say for now, well, we're talking about price increases. WeTransfer have just increased their prices by, well, in fact, end of last year, but they've just increased their prices by nearly 100%, which is an interesting inflationary measure. So as a result, we're switching. You'll see a new address from next couple of weeks onwards. For now, by all means, send your stuff into that address. So paulreeferlive.wetransfer.com. Upload your raw file, upload any edited files that you've got, which you can export from Capture One as a package, as an EIP. And include your name and what you want to do or what you want help with, and we'll try and help as many of you as we can. Quick thinking about helping as many people as we can. Remember as well, last week, where are we? Competition winner, Ian. Yes, but more importantly than who won, it's what they won. It's a Growfie. I'm actually going to see if we can get one of these made. It's that hideous. So I kind of want one, and we'll try and ship it around. But monthly competition. Join that Facebook group. Oops. You can upload your photos. It's just for fun. There's no prize other than bragging rights on here. But also in that Facebook group, more importantly than the competition, almost, is a discussion that sometimes we have. And one of those discussions this week was from Alan. And Alan, you better be awake, mate, because it is middle of the night over in Australia. I get it. But Alan's question for a competition and for screens was, given that you've got a mix of monitors, 1920, so full HD, so 1920 by 1080, versus 4K, being 3840 by 2160. There you go. What do we ask competition entrants to submit in terms of size, numbers, and all that sort of stuff? The general answer is you probably want them to submit in the highest possible screen that a judge is likely to use or you are likely to use viewing. You don't want them submitting in the lowest, and the reason is this. Let me just pull up my Grover pointer. For those of you that don't know, this is David Grover. He works at Capture One, and when he's not available live, he's available in spirit. So, if I shoot and deliver an image in 3840, the result that comes out on a 1920 screen, in other words, a full HD screen rather than a 4K screen, is actually pretty sharp. These are 100% crops, 1-to-1. So if the screen is downscaling effectively, and ideally I was always told this, and there is some logic to it. Ideally you want a multiple of 2, so for every 4 pixels you're binning 3 effectively, so it's neat in that sense, but you're likely to end up with a sharper image. It's not having to worry about splitting pixels in by 3 and stuff like that. So taking a 3840 image and displaying it on a full HD screen, it will still look sharp, it will still have all the detail, it will look quite nice actually. However, if you take a 1920 image at 100% and you blow it up on a 3840 screen, what you'll have, a lot of people think it will go blurry. It actually won't. What you'll end up with is almost jaggedy edges. It is a little bit blurry. It's a little bit soft. There's half a Grover there. Let's get rid of him. But what you'll end up with is more pixelation, interpolation that you can't control because the screen and the computer is deciding how to interpolate that up bigger. So for every 1 pixel, it's now creating another 3. So remember, going from HD to 4K, it's not double. Well, it is double. You're going 1920 to 3840, but in area, you're going from 1 pixel to 4 pixels. So for every 1 pixel in the original image, at 3840, your screen has to imagine, and the software has to imagine, what would be in the other 3. So effectively, all it's doing is it's blowing it up, and no different to if you just increase the size of a low-res image to double in Photoshop or whatever, you're going to see artifacts, you're going to see some blurriness. Yeah, don't do it. You want to get those images out in as high a resolution as possible within reason, and then let the screens downsample. Downsampling is going to get you much better quality than upsampling a low res one. Roger, good question. How do Retina screens figure in this conversation? Well, a Retina screen effectively is doing that all the time. So on a Retina screen, let's imagine you had a full HD Retina screen. So Retina is a thing that Apple coined as a I guess trademark, or well, anyway, I'm not sure if they trademarked it. Basically, anything above, I think it's 226 pixels per inch, which was seen as at a reasonable viewing distance, because remember it changes with something called arc. But with a reasonable viewing distance, your eyes cannot perceive a pixel. So an iPhone screen may be 230, 260, 300 pixels per inch. Because of that, it was able to take much higher resolution images and squash them down. So for example, if you had a full HD screen that's 1920 by 1080, a Retina version of it could be a 3840 screen with tinier pixels, so you can't make them out, you can't see the pixels, but therefore it's squashing 4 times the number of pixels into the space of 1, which means you get the perception of a sharper image. Well, you are getting a sharper image, but it's basically all compressed so you don't see pixels. So Retina is not necessarily about resolution as such, it's about the fact that the pixel size is so small that you don't see the pixels. So it's nice and crisp and nice and sharp. So it's the same sort of theory. You're not really going to be changing much in terms of, so if I took the 4K image and squished it down to 1920, if the screen has 3840 pixels and I squish it down to the size, physical size of the same 1920 screen, I'm going to end up with a sharper image. If I remove those pixels by physically downsampling or downsizing the image down to 1920, it's throwing away 3 out of 4 pixels, and it's working out what the average was in there. Oh, that was quite a lot of words. So, pass. So the picture itself isn't being manipulated, right? Only the preview on the higher resolution screen gets changed. Correct. The underlying picture doesn't change. All that's happening, so the JPEG, if it's a JPEG, that's not altered. All that's happening is your screen is either upsampling it or downsampling it. In the case of upsampling it, we're purely talking about full HD to 4K. In upsampling, your software and therefore screen has to work out what to fill in 3 extra pixels in place of 1, so you get 4 times the number of pixels. If you're downsampling it, it's binning 3 out of the 4 and reducing it down to the 1. Downsampling tends to lead to better results than upsampling, because you can always remove data, but you can't add it without inventing stuff. Oh, there you go, Tim. Yeah, so Retina screen is it's a high resolution screen. It's about pixel size. It's not necessarily about resolution, but it kind of is resolution, because in order to get those smaller pixels, for the same perceived resolution on the screen, you need more of them, just a lot smaller. And yes, there we go. Alan is up. Now for the fun of trying to... Now for the fun of trying to convince the committee to move to 3840 JPEGs. Honestly, nowadays, that shouldn't be hard. I can't think of one camera out there that's not capable of 3840. And it's not huge storage space. It's not... Yeah, just make it the rule. Right. Tony, if the competition is projected digital images, the projector works at 19... Yes, and would it be better to size at 1920 for this? Yes. So, just to let's round the corner of the discussion. In both these cases, we are talking about... Ooh, that's weird. Why didn't that comment disappear? We're talking about allowing the computer and the screen to decide how to upsample an image. In both cases, you are relinquishing control of your image. You're allowing the viewer's screen or computer to make decisions on what to do with those pixels, either invent more or delete them. In a perfect world, you would know the resolution for the person's screen or projector or whatever, and you would deliver it to them in that. And the reason being, because you might want to sharpen for that resolution. You might want to make sure that at that resolution, you've got the right detail, the right type of downsampling, because there's many different ways of resampling an image. So if you do know the destination resolution, don't leave it to chance, don't leave it to the machines. Make your decision, output it at that resolution, because it means that you're getting exactly what you expected, 1-to-1 pixels. If you know it's a 4K screen, export it at 3840. If you know it's a full HD screen, export it at 1920. The problem is, and where Alan specifically came from, was if you're delivering it to, let's say, 10 different judges for a photo panel, honestly, you can't control their hardware unless you're going to provide it. You're providing hardware for judges, that's nice. But I don't think you are. Speaking of judges, fun one. Let me just load some pictures. We're going to go bad. We're going to go scary. We're going to go into something that's not Capture One very quickly. We're going to go into Photoshop. Ooh. It's all right. Photoshop's not bad. We like Photoshop too. Fun one. ChatGPT. Everyone's scared of AI. Everyone's scared of ChatGPT. I actually put this up on LinkedIn a few days ago. If ever you're looking at images and ranking and seeing what could be improved and so on, ask some of these tools. It may be subjective, and remember, the pool that it's coming from is the average of everything that's out there. So if you submit something that's decent, it's likely to go overboard in its appraisal. But the valuable bit in this, and you can see here, this is the prompt here that I gave ChatGPT. Literally, upload a picture and ask it to score it as if it was in a photographic competition and suggest ways to improve each score. It breaks down its thoughts based on all of the data that's wrongly scraped without permission, but the fact is it's done it. It's already done it. And it can give you some scores, but more importantly, and this is the value in this, it will also give you improvements, which is quite interesting. I would forget the scoring, personally, but look at the improvements and think about the next time you go out and shoot, could I do that differently? Could I play with that? Upload several images, get them ranked. There's lots and lots of things that you can do with this. But honestly, if you're looking for, let's call it cold independent critique, and by the way, you can tell ChatGPT to be less than flattering. You can tell it to be over flattering. If you need an ego boost, tell it to tell you everything that's lovely about your picture. But I would tell it personally to go on the cynical side and tell you what you should do to change it or improve it. That, to me, all of a sudden is a useful use of AI and the knowledge that it's building up in its great big models. Other uses, I'm not so convinced. But anyway. So, fun, yeah? Have a play. Right, let's get back on track to talking about Capture One. Couple of things. So, yeah, please do put comments in if we need to check. Path is brought up, found similar struggle with color cast and contrast on different screens. This is the problem with delivering to digital. And actually, to be fair, it's the problem with delivering to print. Even if you were to deliver to print, you know the output, but you don't know the lighting conditions that it's under. You don't know the temperature of the lights that's going under. You don't know whether there's sunlight facing it, whether it's in the shadow, whether it's in cool light, warm light. These are problems that photographers have had for a long, long time in terms of projecting what we thought we wanted to express into an environment that we can't control. Right, picture editing. Let's have a look. We're going to come back to this, but here's a little glimpse. So Martin wants some help with atmosphere. We'll talk about that in a second. Let's start with Ken's shot of a boat. And the question from Ken was, done a lot of work. Could I have saved myself a lot of time in doing it, or is there a different way of doing the edits that I did? First thing, for those of you that don't know, in terms of how to export a file for this session, when you go to export, you can tell it export original files. And the dialog that will come up, you can actually say export as an EIP, sorry, and include adjustments. That creates a little package of your raw file, the adjustments you've made, saves it as what's called an EIP file. You can send that to us and we can have a look at everything you've done as well as the original raw, which is kind of handy. In terms of me seeing everything that Ken's done, I need to expand two things, and there's two things that keep resetting. I've noticed this on the workspaces, but please always have them open, whatever tab you are on, and I mean this, whether you're on the color tab, whether you're on the details tab, whether you're on the standard exposure tab. I want to see everyone's workspace with layers and histogram open always. And the problem with these is they don't stick always across all the different tabs. So you may have to, in your workspace, when you update, go to Window, Workspace, and save it again with these open. But see, a lot of people, when they're masking, they didn't know what layer they were on. They've accidentally overwritten a mask on a layer that they didn't mean to. And more importantly, this is your output histogram. So bear in mind, not all of the histograms are output. What I mean by that, let me just clone this, clone the variant so that we're not editing Ken's original. If I shift my exposure, this is showing me here what I'm getting as the output from Capture One. In here, as I start to manipulate things like curves, you notice that this histogram here is changing, my output histogram. But my input histogram here, based on the curve change specifically that I'm doing, you notice the values aren't changing. And that's because this needs to be set as a reference. So this has a lot of the other tools applied, like exposure, contrast, and so on. But the changes I'm making in the curve are not reflected in the curve's histogram. They're only reflected in the output histogram, this big one up here. Please keep that open always. It'll help you. This is telling you the exact range of tones that are going to come out from that picture, from bright highlights down to dark shadows and blanks. Right, workspace setup. Let's have a look exactly at what Ken did. So we've got an image layer on the background. That image layer, we can talk about this until the cows come home. Where's that phrase come from? Anyway, the image layer, it used to be called background. It's now called image layer. You can change the, oh, sorry. Good question, Tim. I like interruptions. Good question. So if I change the histogram in another tool like levels, does it reflect in the curve? Yes. You notice the levels histogram doesn't change, but the curve one does. So the tool that I'm manipulating between levels and curves does not change its own histogram. Got it? But the output one does. In terms of levels, while it changes our reference histogram in curves, the curve does not change the levels histogram. So these two remain as reference based on, imagine this, all of the tools above. Curve will affect the output histogram, but it does not affect the reference of these two. Right, let's just reset some of that again, sorry. So, image layer. You can make all the changes you want on your image layer. There is an advantage to not doing so, which is if I decide I don't like all of these changes together, so an individual tool I can always reset. I can reset our contrast tool pretty easily. Double clicking on any of these sliders will reset them back to their base. But imagine I wanted to change the overall change that I'd made and reduce its impact. So a little bit less clarity, a little bit less structure, a little bit less dehaze. I can't on my image layer. My opacity is blocked out. And it's because I've done it on the background image. If I want to bring them up to a layer that I can manipulate, you've now got, as of 16 point something, I think it was, if I right click on the image layer, I can go to move image layer adjustments to a new layer. And it actually calls it moved from image layer 1. Personally, I would put this nice and low down so you remember. And I would call it global adjustments, because typically those adjustments they're not masked. If I press M on the keyboard to show the mask, because it's the image layer, it meant it applied to everything. So I'm using it as a baseline. But what this means now is I can back away those changes in unison. That's the key thing. I don't have to go individually into each tool to back them away. I can do it with opacity. And what it's also done in the process of doing that on the image layer is it's reset my image layer back to what it was. So it's taken, literally removed all those changes, put them onto a new layer. I've now called it global adjustments, and now I can start to switch. So global adjustments we've seen in there. So there's a bit of is there a white balance change? No. So a bit of an exposure pop, pump of contrast, pump of brightness, quite a bit of saturation. 12 is not a small amount on the saturation slider. And then we've got some clarity, 21, reasonable amount. Structure, 11, that's talking about edges. So clarity is giving you some mid-tone contrast, so it's defining things a bit better. Think about branches on trees. Structure is thinking about leaves on trees, so it's the edges it's finding, it's the little details. Structure also has a habit of bringing up noise, so do bear that in mind. Dehaze on there, so it's a way of getting rid of any, they call it shadow tone, but effectively any overall washing tone like fog would be, we can remove it in one go. Michael, if you move the image layer adjustments to a new layer, are they reset in the image layer? Yes, that's exactly what happened here. So if I go to my image layer now, you'll see all these sliders have been reset back to 0. The sliders that won't appear to have reset, and it's not because they haven't moved, are things like vignetting and things like the black and white tool. The reason is because they don't sit on a layer. So if I were to change our vignette here, it doesn't matter what layer I go to, that tool stays the same, and the reason is because those tools, this one and black and white, for example, they go across all the layers. They're not layer specific, but anything that is layer specific will be removed. Keith, do I recommend doing global adjustments on several layers to give you more control? I'd argue if it's a global adjustment, no. I'd do some sort of base edits, let's call it that, the basics on one layer. And then the specifics, for me, typically, I would be looking at any layer should have a mask associated with it. If it doesn't, then you're probably okay doing it on a global layer, personally. Right. That vignette helped. Maybe we'll come on to that. So the global adjustments, it's moved all of these things across. These aren't particularly bad adjustments. Let's look at the before image. So before and after up here on your toolbar, or press the Y key on your keyboard. And actually what we're going to do is we're going to build this up layer by layer from what Ken's done. So our global adjustments has basically, as you can imagine from the sliders, it has lifted everything. So it's increased our exposure, increased some contrast, increased some brightness. It's also cleaned it up with a bit of dehaze. It's also added some contrast in there with clarity and structure. So if you look at like the tree detail, done a pretty good job of defining them. So it's not a bad layer in that sense. Let's look at the other ones. So foreground, literally a masked layer just on this bottom part here, and that's to lift brightness. Makes sense a bit, I guess. This foreground's obviously sat in shadow, so that lifts it a little bit. Brightness being the one that won't affect exposure. Sorry, it won't affect pushing highlights or shadows the same way exposure does, by pushing them out of bounds, so beyond 255 or beyond 0. The problem is it's also it has a flattening effect. So if you don't need to use brightness, and I would argue down here you don't, because if I look at these numbers up here, the ones that are telling me how bright things are, none of these numbers are hitting above 200. So there isn't really any risk of using exposure. But what exposure will do is give it to us in a much more natural way because it's lifting everything by the same amount. Brightness is squashing data. It's squashing it brighter and squashing it darker. Exposure is sliding data. So if you don't have to use brightness, I would, to be more authentic, I would stick with exposure if you can. The yacht specifically. Nice little mask on there. I'm guessing it was done with AI unless Ken's going to tell me that he did it all by hand, but this is quite intricate if that's the case. There are a couple of bits that are missing on here, and I want to flag this, and we talk about this quite a lot. Get your masks right, please. Before, you would have said that whole yacht sort of lit up, right? No, it doesn't. Look at the bits that don't. Here, here, here. And I know that as well because when I go into my mask, so grayscale mask, so up here, display grayscale mask, I can see the bits that are missing. Not great. So if you are going to mask, please do mask it properly. And to do that, I'm going to just use the AI mask again. So let's just see if we can get that bit and all of that and all of that masked. Masking masks. That's very confusing. There we go. So this isn't perfect, but it is better. If I look at before versus after. So that's our original mask, and this is our corrected one. You know, it's just not great. If you are going to go to the trouble and the struggle of getting these masks on there, do them completely. Just check them through. And also on here, you know, I'd be in a place of why isn't the sail included? If we're frankly faking a bit of light coming in, then the sail would also be lit, right? So let's do that. Let's also light the sail up. And again, it may not be perfect at this point here, but if I were to do that correctly from the outset and then refine it, I'd end up with a much better result. So do be careful. If you are going to mask intricate objects, make sure that you're masking the whole thing. Then I come into another thing, which is this reflection here is based on the white balance or the reflection of the blue shadowed boat. So it does not make sense that we've got a deep blue shadowed, especially in this water here, reflection of a warm white boat. So what's happened on this mask is it's reduced some of the saturation, got rid of that blue color, warmed it up a lot. We've gone from sort of 5,000 Kelvin up to 10,000 Kelvin to a lot yellower. Great, no problem. But that's not matched by the reflection. So, and I don't see on here another layer that has the reflection covered. So for me, this needs another mask. Now, what I can do, because I'm worried about refining another mask, what I might do here is, what shall I do? I could, right, I'm going to create a new layer called reflection. I want the same adjustments, but I want a different mask. This layer has no mask on it. So I'm going to put it next to the boat layer so that I know how it's connected. Whoops. On my normal big screen, we can do this a lot easier. The tools are a bit bigger, but for here, it's a bit finicky. Okay, so I've got a reflection layer. Apply adjustments for us. Sorry, we need to save it first. So, yacht. Save adjustments as style. And I'm going to call it Yachty. Reflection. Apply adjustments from Yachty. Now, no, nothing's changed. Why? Because there's no mask. So I've got all the adjustments, the same adjustments here. I could have made them manually. I'm just being lazy by doing it through a style. But instead, I'm now going to mask this shadow. And I don't like the fact that my AI mask is getting a bit too broad. I don't think that's going to work. No. So let's try a magic brush mask. Really low tolerance. Try the blue. Yeah. Let's get in there. Yep. So Magic Brush, remember, just because AI brushing came along doesn't mean that Magic Brush is dead to us. We still like Magic Brush quite a lot. It does good things. Go to my grayscale mask, which is Option and M, or you can go up here, like I said earlier. Display grayscale mask. Okay. I want to refine this mask because I don't want it to be quite as sharp as the end was just then. turn off my mask, and we now see we've got a reflection, but it's wrong. It's too strong. So let me unrefine that mask. I'm not particularly happy with that. But because it's on a layer and a separate layer to the boat, look what I can do. Pull back that opacity. Or, more importantly, in this case, I can edit that mask. So I'm going to go into our overall mask. Let me just turn this off so I can see. The issue, I think, yeah, is it's getting extra stuff that we don't want. So let me use a magic eraser. Same thing, really low tolerance. Let's try and get this down. There we go. That's pretty good. Then we might want to refine it a little bit. So you see I've made the shadow smaller, but I'm now refining it to spread it a bit more. Hit apply. And now we've got a more realistic, it's not perfectly realistic, we would have to add into here as well. So, you know, this isn't a quick job in that sense. We might even need to feather that mask. Let me just go into here and refine again. So we're going to refine it out, apply. Let's do that again. Apply. I'm going to erase, so using the standard eraser, the bits that I don't want. I actually really want the base of the boat, to be honest. So let's fix that in there. Good. And get rid of some of this in here. So I do want this trail here. Good. So you saw how rough that was. And then with that reflection, well, actually, it's getting better. Let's just shift this a bit more. We might need to add a bit of extra just flow on here. Of course, the other thing as well we can play with. Fun one. Very fun one. I'm going to try a new layer just to see something. We'll call it fun one. I'm going to remove this mask. I'm going to magic brush my shadow again on my new fun one layer. And I'm going to go more than I need. So we're adding in more of the shadow in there. Like that. I'm going to refine that mask to spread it some more. Good. What is it that I want to change? It's the blue. So I've got a mask that's mostly on the blue, but as you saw, it can go over the top with that reflection one. It unfortunately gets a bit carried away. Let's just move it there. So that reflection one starts to lose the bits that I do want and not be enough on the bits that I don't. So instead, let's go into our color editor. I can pick, but we know where it's going to sit, but I can pick here, these blues, and I can shift the hue to be more pink or more green. In this case, I want it a bit more green. Saturation I want to come down. Lightness I might want to increase a little bit. And also then, I'm going to go into our greens now. This is almost a Tim sort of setup. We won't talk about that. Pick on my saturation again. Smoothness out there again. Expand what area is covered. And I can still go into my white balance on this mask and increase it. So two very different ways. One is by basically trying to mask it very cleverly, to do some refining, to use those same changes that were done on the boat but on the reflection. The other is to go a bit more rogue, a bit more retro, which is the way that we would have done it actually before we could refine things properly, which is with the color editor. And when I say we've timmed it, I mean we've doubled down on changing the blue. So we've done one change, then we selected it again and made another change, and you can keep pushing the envelope. But to me, this then doesn't make sense, right? This sort of does. That's the most important bit. Craig, did the boat layer have a color change or color temperature change? Yes, it did. The problem is that color change, if I just rely on that, so let's create a new layer and copy the mask from my fun one and just rely on the white balance change. You see we're hitting more than my shadow, and the reason is because my mask actually has subtle spread onto the rest of the water, whereas putting most of the change into the blue adjustment, so it's the same mask, my fun one, literally I copied the mask across, but most of the change has been done on our color editor, so it's taken the blue and moved it to be more green, less saturated. You know, the biggest change is this -50 saturation. It's got rid of the saturation. But then on top of that, we do a smaller adjustment to white balance just to warm it up a little bit. Then you get a much cleaner and more realistic result. So 2 methods. One's going to take you a lot longer to refine mask. The other is a bit more keeping it real. But either way, I think you'd all agree this blue reflection doesn't make sense. This one kind of does. Okay, next layer. Ken, you love the fact that we're dissecting your image. I'm sorry, but you asked, is there different ways of doing this? Yeah. So the snow, we have a layer on here which brings down the highlights a little bit, and all that's doing is giving us some of the detail back in the snow. So if we zoom in quite a lot, more than sort of 300% there. Up here, quite bright. Down here, less. I'm going to be honest, Ken, I don't think you need this layer. None of this snow here without the layer. If I go to exposure warning, you're getting little specular bits, but even with that snow layer, they're still there. I don't think it needs to be particularly darkened. So I wouldn't bother with that snow layer. The sky layer. So we've got a mask over the sky specifically. We've got an exposure warning out on the sky without this layer. Why? Well, because of this brightness here. So up here without the layer, let me just get rid of my mask and exposure warning. So without the layer, we are at 205. If you look up here, overall luminosity 205. That's not overexposed, but look at the blue channel, 255. So we've got an oversaturation or an over brightness in blue, not so much red, not so much green. Now, the argument is, what have we actually gained by doing this pull down? Look, without and with. Because it's brightness, it hasn't had quite the effect. And I think I'd be in a place of I wouldn't do this with brightness. Again, for the same reason. I do want to pull that data down off of that right-hand wall. So I'm going to do it all with exposure and then maybe even pump a little bit of saturation. And if I want to see a change that's happening, because obviously this only comes up when my mouse is over the image. We talked about this last week, but I can add a color readout. So when I'm in a tool, I can see the effect it's having on those colors. And in theory, I can push this right up until that blue hits nearly 255, a lot stronger blue. Then I can pull my exposure down and have a lot deeper blue. Now, I'm not saying this is right, just to be clear. There's also a little bit of a white balance change there. I'm just going to knock that back out. But you see how much extra control you've got as a result of playing with different sliders, not just relying on brightness. So for me, if we're playing with blue skies, think about why it's oversaturated and think about how you want to change that. If we want it to be deeper blue, go with that. But this is the result of white balance and exposure and saturation, not just the brightness slider. This, I'm just going to get rid of that color readout. Okay. Let's have a look at our next layer, the healing layer. What have we got on our healing layer? Down here. Oh, okay. Just a couple of the buoys, not buoys. It's not spelt buoy, it's spelt boy. Or buoy or whatever. Why can't we just make the word different? Make it easier. Right. Removing these using the healing tool. I'm not going to go into that. It's a good reason to do it, but look at this here, it is clear that something has been removed. And if I look at why it's clear, let's look at our mask and let's go to my healing tool itself, and we can see it's picked up from here and moved it to there. You need these ripples to be similar in their source and their eventual location. So I would be in a place of, you can move these around for a reason. It needs to be convincing. And if I look at there's an obvious thing missing. Here, not quite so obvious. There's still something missing, but at least they're similar. Here again, the same thing. So the source that capture one, maybe it chose it, but the source that it's selected, I would say, isn't the right source. I would say this needs to come from about maybe there, and this needs to come from somewhere here. And again, it's not going to be perfect, but you do want it to look a little less obvious that something has been removed. Why is my mouse stopped working? There we go. Okay, right. So that's our heal layer. Trees. This layer up here, no issue with this. The tree layer basically just lifts those trees, and by lifting, I mean it's adding contrast to it. It's giving them more presence. So I would be in a place of, yeah, I mean the adjustment here is basically pulling down the brightness, and there's no problem with that. There's no other real adjustment in here apart from an additional clarity boost just on the trees. The mask itself hasn't been overly refined, which is good. There is a luma range on it to block out the stuff that's not a tree, which is good. So all the right things. It's just if you did want a bit more contrast, you wouldn't need to use clarity and structure. You could just do it with the standard contrast tool. And then maybe you might want to pull up some exposure a little bit, because in theory, this is the bit that's getting hit by the sun, right? So anyway, likewise, if we're pulling up the overall tone of this to suggest that it was in more golden light, maybe we go and just very quickly add another water layer. And I'm going to just switch to a grayscale mask. No, it's got it. Okay. And again, I'm just going to warm up. Careful of this foreground bit. We might need to counter that. And go into my blues and desaturate those a little bit out here. Now, remember, we had that foreground layer at the very beginning. So this has gone too mushy now, so we can back that away to be back to more neutral. Like that. And again, just like I was showing you with masking, even that mask I just did, note that my mask does not include inside the boat. So please do make sure if you're going to add in masks, you get all the gaps. Boats are a pain because they've got ropes everywhere and all that sort of stuff. But you get the idea. Same in here, actually. Yeah, we are missing a little bit in there. Okay. So to make it natural, oh, sorry, I did that on Ken's own image, not on this one. Silly, but you get the idea. I'm not going to go over it again. I'm just going to get rid of that layer so we can just compare. But you get the idea. And this is purely about just making it work and realistic. Get your masks right, get the contrast right. Think about the result of making changes. If you make the change to the object, then you need to make the change to its reflection. Only use corrections where you need them, all that sort of stuff. So overall, Ken, no issue with all the layers you've done. It's just maybe refine some of them, and some of them you just don't need. Going back to, I can't remember whose point it was, but would this image work with a vignette? Yes, it would. Not too much of one, but just to soften those corners, maybe. Yeah, pretty good. Okay, let's get on to Martin's shot. Why is my mouse playing up at the moment? Very weird. Sorry about that. Okay, how do we add more atmosphere? Well, this is the original file here. This is our color graded file from Martin. So all of it's been done in the image layer. No issue with doing that, but just bear that in mind. Huge swings. So, big reduction in highlights, big reduction in white. This is a big change for what is actually a very, very little or subtle output difference, which is what I'm surprised by. And then I start looking at it and thinking, so why these big swings? They don't make sense. High dynamic range, pulling down the highlights, is pulling down all the data that's here down into the midtones. Well, there isn't any. There isn't any data up here to pull down. This is having no effect, so don't do it. Whites, well, if there's nothing in the highlights, there's certainly nothing in the whites, so don't do it. If you want atmosphere, we want to add in maybe some fog, we want to add in some hazy stuff, and the clue is in the name. So I'm going to switch. So all of these adjustments here I think can be done differently. Let's create a variant of this one. So this is the raw. Great. Create a new layer, new filled adjustment layer. I'm just going to do it from the outset and call it global adjustments. And we want this to have some atmosphere. Well, first off, let's add some contrast. Now, contrast is going to make the darker bits darker, the lighter bits lighter, but we don't really have any lighter bits. One option we've got is to change our curve from auto to being linear response. Now, there's lots of sessions we've done previously on this, but linear response flattens out the curve of what you're seeing. So if you're seeing a really, really high contrast image with not a lot of data that's beyond just the shadows, linear response isn't a bad place to start, because we end up getting rid of some of that punchiness, and we end up with a lot more data to begin with. So with that data, I could then, from linear response, go to my levels and start lifting it into here. Great. I could lift up my shadows a little bit. Nice. And what is good in here, look at these little sort of catch or rim lights effectively on the side of these trees. The light hitting these is actually really nice, so we want to accentuate that. I can add a little bit of clarity. Get down to the tool. A little bit of structure. Dehaze. So if I dehaze this image, it's interesting. I'm making it bolder, but I'm losing atmosphere. If I add haze to this image and say, this is my haze color, it's adding in atmosphere, right? So hold that thought. We're going to vignette it a little bit, and I'm going to split tone it a little bit. So I'm going to make my shadows bluer and my highlights the opposite direction, maybe up here to sort of slightly orangey. We don't have many highlights, so I'm going to replicate that with my midtones. So my midtones go into a warmer space. My shadows go into a much bluer space, about there. So I said about dehaze. Let's create a new layer. I'm going to call it rehaze. Guess what we're going to do? I'm going to choose my fog color. So when it says shadow tone, imagine fog color. And I'm going to put in a negative amount of haze. So if I were to fill this entire image with it, we can see how much haze it's going to put in about there. Okay. Clear that mask. Brush. Normal brush. We don't want any cleverness. Normal brush. Really low flow. Really, really big. Really soft. I can add in fog. Be careful how you do this. Fog has a way of wrapping around trees. It doesn't have the abilities in certain places to do stuff that you think about. Daniel, why are your color wheels different to yours? Possibly because you're on a master wheel or you're on the shadow wheel. If you go to three-way, you'll see that. If you're worried about, where is it? I can't remember what it is. There was a way you could switch the wheels or something around. I can't remember, but that's probably it, that you're on a slightly different tab. But all I'm doing here, if we look at our mask, is I'm painting fog. Now, I'm not advocating faking an image. It would be much nicer if this was genuine fog. But if you want atmosphere, we're adding it. Let's add a bit more of that fog. So remember, I've now got a fog machine, right? I've got a mask with subtle amounts. And I've got an amount slider here, which I can either clean that up or I can add more fog in. So let's go to maybe there. Cool. I might want to pull down that vignette a bit more. I might then want to pull up my exposure a touch. Oh, sorry. On the main image, global adjustments layer. And now I might want to pull down my shadows. Touch more clarity. Remember that clarity is going to undo what some of that fog did. Maybe I want to pull in a little, well, we've got a nice little light streak coming in there. So we can add a bit more of that with our rehaze layer. Really accentuate that. Accentuate that. So how do I get more atmosphere? Here's my original. Here's one with more atmosphere. Not that. That does work. It is an atmosphere. But I'm not sure. Ah, yeah, thanks, Joe. Sorry. Yeah, there's a setting to change the color wheels in your preferences. So go to your preferences menu. You'll find the setting in there if you want to flip them around. Keith, when painting in the fog, would you be better served by using the grayscale mask to define the application? The problem with using the grayscale mask, so yes, in theory, but I don't know where the trees are. And that's a problem because I kind of want to dance around the trees. I want to add in bits of haze between the trees and maybe in front of this one. So I'm doing it based on the overall picture, not just sort of drawing random bits of fog and stray fog and stuff. But if the question is, how do I add atmosphere to this shot like that? Don't add in more than is realistic. Well, to be honest, we've taken this away from reality anyway, but just bear that in mind. Don't try and recover highlights that aren't there. Don't push for more and more and more contrast in an image that's only black. And remember this one, if you're changing the curve, because let's go back to what we had before, the film standard curve, which is the auto curve. It will, in fact, the auto curve on this case, because it was shot on a Fuji, is it a Fuji? Yeah, I think it's actually picked up whatever recipe you had in the camera. But this could be atmospheric if you liked it, but the linear response is probably a bit more moody. But we can do both. You can have one with linear response and one with film standard. These two do have atmosphere. This one just has a color grade, and the grade is just too much of a shift. It's not really working for me. Same could be applied to this one. So here was the original one. Here's Martin's edit. I get the colors. If you want to add the colors in, there's no problem with doing it. But just bear in mind that you're losing some of the atmosphere by trying to add in some color change in there. And I'm not entirely sure where that color shift has come from, if I'm honest. Because I don't see... Very strange. It's purely the saturation slider. Yeah. So be careful with that, because this has got green air and blue at the top. I'd be tempted, in this case here, here's a fun one. For no reason whatsoever, I'm going to copy those adjustments. So Command Shift C or Control C or whatever. Go into this shot here. Own the variant, the original one. Paste those same adjustments. Instantly, it's the same atmosphere. The rehaze on this, I might not want fog to be in here, but I can brush it. That's the point. I can now play with the amount of haze that's in there. And my global adjustments now, I might want to pull down there. I might want to pull in a bit more contrast and shift maybe my shadows to be a bit darker. This has atmosphere. This doesn't, depending on the type of atmosphere you want. Path, I find the Luma range and linear grab mask for rehaze works quite well. Yes, it will do as well. You can put a very natural fog effect in. All of these ways are just methods of creating something that looks realistic. But for me, if that was the original image, and there is some color in there. Keith's asked, was it done through external filters? I don't know, but it is a strange color in there. That to me feels atmospheric. This just doesn't. And the same here. So there's our original. That feels like there's some atmosphere in there. Even the one with the standard curve with some light coming through feels atmospheric. This one just feels like a big grade has been put over the top. David, I wonder. just in time, David. I wonder how match look would work in this case. Let's try it, because luckily Martin's got another one. But let's do it on this original one. So I'm going to take this image, which we have edited, and I'm going to go to match look, and I'm going to drag it across and say I want this as a reference. What match look is not going to do is do my mask. It's not going to copy my mask across. It's not going to do any of the clever stuff like that. But what it is going to do is globally change my next image. So this one, let's create a clone of that variant. So this again is the original. So before and after, no different. I've got the one that I edited here, this one here. I'm going to leave all the options on just to see what it does out of the box. Yeah, it pushes it a bit too much. So let's undo that. Let's turn off our color adjustment and hit apply. Okay. So it's not quite getting it. It's taking the overall feel. Maybe we don't want normalize. Let's just try that. No. So what I would do though is leave it like this and then just pull down our saturation in my match look layer. Now what it hasn't done is add in that layer, add in the mask, add in the fog stuff, the rehaze and so on, because match look is a global layer, just to be clear. And it's done this levels thing a different way to what I would have done personally. But it's not far off. It's just, I think the manual way of doing it's a bit better. Okay. So I know that was a lot of time on Ken's, but there's a lot of things in there to talk through, especially about thinking about the image. Stop thinking about the masks and the process and start thinking about the logic of the image. If an object has a reflection which is warmer, sorry, if the object is warmer, then its reflection should be warmer. If the sea has been, or the lake has been warmed up because of the perceived light, then warm it up. You don't need to recover highlights that aren't blown. You don't need to recover saturations that aren't oversaturated. If you choose to, you can, but sometimes just putting a layer in for the sake of it does more harm than good. This one here, this is just about adding atmosphere. Atmosphere to me doesn't feel, these feel atmospheric. These versions here just feel like the saturation's been pumped too much. It doesn't feel quite the same. So I'd be in a place of a slightly more natural approach there, even though it's not natural because we faked some fog. True story. So there we go. Funky little forest. Georg will come back to yours next time. Ken's boat out here. Just a few changes, but it's the little details. Just be careful with it to make sure that it's complete. Okay, so between now and a couple of weeks' time, I've got a couple of weeks off. Sorry, I'm out in the middle of snowy places. But I will be on there. So submit your February images, and the next time we're on, we will announce the winner, and the winner, of course, wins the Growfie. That's where to do it. In between now and then, you can access all of those masterclasses. They're on a link in this video. There's a playlist that covers those. For things like Luma ranges and before and after tools and all those sort of things, there's these pro tips, which you can also access on the channel. But between now and a couple of weeks' time, that's how to get hold of us, and we'll see you then. Cheers, bye.